In 1983, you moved from the East Coast to the LA area. What prompted your move?
Well, I had been in a couple of original bands in the Maryland, D.C. area, and each one kind of rose to the top and became like the top jazz fusion band at the time. And the last band was called Natural Bridge, and we had Michael Manring on bass in that band. He's gone on to be very famous, playing on all the Windham Hill projects with Michael Hedges and his own great solo bass concept. So what happened was Michael was doing some dates with Michael Hedges, and he was getting ready to go on a tour, and he just said, you know, I got to go on this tour, so I got to leave the band. And in those days, when you were in a band, we committed to the band, and there was no getting a sub or anything. If somebody left a band, you had to replace them. And we had gone through that once or twice before with drummer and a guitar player. And it just didn't seem like we had the energy to continue. And at that point, we dissolved the band, and I freelanced and formed my own little groups, a couple of different arrangements, one that was more acoustic jazz and one that was a power trio. And we did some fun gigs in D.C. We opened up for Jeff Lorber with Kenny G playing sax back then. And we opened up for Billy Cobham's group. And right around that same time, I decided, you know, let me just see if I want to move somewhere and try something different and freelance and play with a lot of different artists, which was a different thing because I was really focused in writing most of the songs for this band. You know, we wrote a lot of the songs together, but, you know, we were really committed to this original project. And so it was either New York City or Los Angeles, and I had never been to the West Coast at all. I'd been to New York a lot, and I'd spent a lot of time visiting my various friends who were hooked up in the jazz scene up there. And the thing about New York is, when you're a keyboard player and you have a Fender Rhodes piano that weighs 65 pounds and synthesizers and speakers, you know, you have to have a van just to get anywhere to do a gig. And New York City, it's finding parking is like incredible. And not only that, the crime scene in New York City, I had experienced it firsthand. Almost every time I would go, something would happen. My car would get broken into, or we would get mugged in an elevator, and everything was okay, you know, everybody's fine. But it was just one of those facts of life. You know, it's an exciting city, but it has its hazards. So I said, yeah, let me just try Los Angeles.
Well, you did well. You played for Melissa Manchester with Richard Elliott on sax. In fact, in the mid-'80s, you formed your own band with Dave Koz, Boney James, and Gary Meek. Please tell us a little bit about that.
Well, going back to my first gigs in Los Angeles, I only knew two people when I moved to Los Angeles. My friend Ned Einstein, who was also a piano player, and Russell Ferrante, the keyboardist with the Yellow Jackets. And I had met them because we opened up a show for them in D.C., and I would always keep in touch with Russell and Robin and Jimmy. Whenever they would come to D.C., I would go visit them, hang out. And so I moved to Los Angeles, and I go see Russell my first week in town. He was playing a gig with Ernie Watts at a little tiny club called Mulberry Street. And after the show, we went out for breakfast, as you normally do. And, you know, he was just being very encouraging and saying, you know, don't worry, Greg, you know, you're new in town, you're good. People always need good keyboard players. And so, you know, I thought that was great. But I saved up a bunch of money, and I was prepared to starve or just live off my savings for certainly 3-6 months. And sure enough, just a few days later, I get a call from Shelby Flint. And I didn't really know who Shelby was, but I found out quickly because Russell had been playing in her group, and Russell was getting busy with the Yellow Jackets, so he recommended me to take his place. And so I got Shelby's music, which was a notebook this thick of all her charts, all original music, and I had to learn all her stuff for a gig that was like the weekend, the following weekend. Like I had 3 or 4 days. So on my 12th day in Los Angeles, I was playing a show at Dante's, a very famous jazz club. It's gone now. With Shelby's group, with some fantastic musicians. The drummer from Wings, Denny Sywell, and the bass player who had played with Joan Armatrading and many other artists, Kim Carnes, sax player from Kim Carnes, percussionist who had played with everybody from Diana Ross to Stevie Wonder. And so right then and there, I kind of got known on the scene because Shelby was very popular around town, and we would play clubs around LA a club called At My Place and a place called the Comeback Inn. And we played a show with Kitty Hawk, which was a fusion band that included two guys who played stick, which is a fretted instrument that has like 11 strings and you hammer on the strings and all this. And Richard Elliott was on sax in this band. So I met Richard, and not a month later he called me to play in his band. And he had just started doing his own shows at My Place. About once a month we would do one night. And from that, Richard was also touring with Melissa Manchester, so he recommended me to fill in the keyboard slot when the keyboard player who had been playing with Melissa, he had a little hit song for Jeffrey Osborne called On the Wings of Love. So I think he decided he'd rather stay at home and write songs than go out on tour. So good news for me. So I toured with Melissa for about 1.5 years, and that was great experience getting out on the road, and I got to save money, and which led to me building my studio and eventually doing a lot of production work for people and songwriter demos and stuff like that.